This week, on my podcast series on diabetes, we're going to talk about diet, and we're going to talk about the impact of the illness on inflammation in the body. These are two interesting, interconnected topics. I don't think this will be a very long session, but let's go ahead and get started. Now, as we've talked about before, the two major things to keep in mind regarding diabetes and energy management is that carbohydrates can enter into the bloodstream directly from the digestive tract, but when you need energy and you don't have very high blood sugar, your body will increase that by releasing sugar from the liver, usually through protein metabolism. So protein and carbohydrates are both potentially problematic in this regard because they lead to a lot of spare energy, which can be basically dumped into the bloodstream as glucose. And especially in the event where you have insulin resistance, the cells in the body are not going to pull that sugar in order to bring the blood sugar down. So before we get into the inflammation side, I think it's really important that we talk about just some general points about energy and diet management in relation to diabetes. The first thing is that starch is way worse than sugar. I'm going to repeat that again. Starch is way worse than sugar. The reason why starch is way worse than sugar is because starch usually breaks down into individual glucose molecules when it's digested in the intestines. And that glucose goes straight into the bloodstream, and it is therefore directly available for use. Table sugar, on the other hand, is split apart into two different molecules, one of which is glucose, so half of it goes in as glucose. The other half goes in as fructose, and fructose can't be directly metabolized by the human body until it's been transformed in the liver. So starch is actually twice the problem that twice the problem that sugar is, table sugar, or honey, or similar sugars like that. The second thing is that when you eat something sweet, your liver will release blood sugar. So, cutting down on sweets is a generally good practice. This includes things like diet soda, because even if diet soda doesn't have any sugar in it, your body will still release blood sugar. In fact, that can actually be worse because your body will release the blood sugar, but you don't get anything from your digestive system, and so your blood sugar can go through a much faster spike and fall. So cut down on diet sodas, cut down on sugared sodas, cut down on sugared drinks, cut down on desserts generally. That doesn't mean you can never eat all those, but don't make them a major part of your diet. The second part here is in the general management. You should try to make sure that half of what you eat are non-starchy, fibrous vegetables, things like salads, leafy greens, that sort of thing. We don't include in that category peas. We don't include corn because both of those are quite starchy, and same thing with beans. Yes, these will provide some protein that you can metabolize. They'll provide some carbohydrates, but not a lot. And because they are fibrous, they tend to take a lot longer for the enzymes to break them down and for the proteins and sugars and carbohydrates in them to reach your blood system. So, the other half should be split between carbohydrates and proteins. So that's going to be your starchy vegetables, or it can be potatoes, rice, bread, that sort of thing. And the other side would be proteins like meat, that sort of thing. It's really helpful in this case to note that if you can have at least half of your carbohydrates come from whole grains, that also limits the exposure of your body to sudden increases in blood sugar due to digestion. And this is what we're interested in here. So we're interested in avoiding sudden changes to blood sugar. As a note, fruit, particularly fresh fruit, is not considered to be a terrible problem. This is because a large part of the sugar comes from fructose. Fructose has to be metabolized by the liver, and so there is a extra throttling step before that becomes blood sugar that's available for use. So in the event where you're feeling low in blood sugar, you can eat a piece of fruit. Your liver will often release more blood sugar. You'll feel better, but the amount of sugar entering your system will be low enough that it's not going to cause a blood sugar spike after that, but it'll still be high enough that you won't see a massive crash. So fruit is actually a very good thing, and it's actually the first thing I would recommend in the event where you're feeling hypoglycemic. So as I've mentioned a few times before, diet is largely a damage control strategy. With a few exceptions, which we'll talk about in a few moments. It's not really a disease prevention or reversal strategy. There are people trying to sell diets as that. I see no reason to believe that. And so, as I say, it's good to try to keep in line with portion control on carbohydrate and protein heavy foods. If you can shift calories from proteins and carbohydrates to fats, that's actually a good thing, but don't overdo it. You still need some carbohydrates and you still need some proteins. So having a higher fat diet, but having good quality fats, things like olive oil, butter, the like, is actually really important, and in this next section I'll talk about why. Now, one of the things you know is that people who have advanced diabetes tend to have a lot of other problems from that. These include blood clotting issues, difficulty with wound healing, the blood clotting issues can lead to circulatory issues, which can lead to limb infections. You can have loss of vision, a lot of other things like that. Now, the exact mechanism by which these occur is not very well understood. However, it looks very likely that systemic inflammation is very important here. So we see a couple of things. We see strong evidence that mast cells, which are cells which are very involved in controlling inflammation, are somehow responsible for damage to the beta cells that produce insulin. And we also see that the same sort of inflammation appears to cause things like blood clotting, slow wound healing, and things like that. Now, one of the very interesting things that people will notice from the past few years is that some of these same issues, including blood clotting, are found with COVID. This is one of the reasons why diabetes is such of a extra risk factor with COVID, is because the same inflammatory pathways that can cause severe illness are impacted on both sides. So in this regard, one of the aspects of managing and trying to reverse the disease is definitely trying to control systemic inflammation. This isn't something that is well understood and well addressed in our current medical system, however. So what I strongly recommend is, in addition to following the general rules relating to diet, to pay close attention to foods which have anti-inflammatory properties. The most important one of these is going to be good quality extra virgin olive oil. Olive oil has been shown in many cases to prolong life, partly by preventing blood clotting and some of these other sorts of things. It does this because it has systemic anti-inflammatory properties. It interferes with a particular signaling chemical that is used in the inflammation process called platelet activating factor. And this both reduces systemic inflammation as well as reduces blood clotting. It reduces buildup of arterial plaque, apparently through the same mechanism. So I strongly recommend shifting fats as much as one can in the direction of things like extra virgin olive oil. There are other nutritional supplements that interfere with the same set of compounds, but many of those are much stronger, and consequently they can have more serious side effects. If that's something that you're interested in, feel free to do your own research, but I'm not going to go ahead and suggest things here that might get people into serious medical trouble. One thing I would also point out is that some fats seem to have inflammatory properties. Highly refined canola oil, highly refined palm oil, some of these other ones. One of the ways in which you can see this is that, for example, in South America, if you have a sore throat, olive oil is often used as a remedy. It actually works. There have been scientific studies which have shown that olive oil has pain-relieving and anti-inflammatory properties, but if you have a sore throat and you're told to avoid foods fried in a particular oil, that's probably a good indication that those oils may actually be inflammatory. So pay close attention to the cooking fats you're using. Try to stick closer to natural fats as much as possible. And that's what I would say on that. So, hope you found this interesting. I hope I've earned a subscription from you if you're not already subscribed. And I'll be back next week for the final one in this series, where I talk about an overall synthetic approach towards looking at managing and hopefully reversing to the extent possible, again, depending on how far it's progressed, this particular illness.